Hello everyone, and welcome to this new chapter. This will be chapter 5, and we'll be focusing on discussing about conditional statements. So in the last few chapters we have seen how to declare variables, how to create our own functions, and the types that we can use in our functions. So we created an anonymous function, we assigned parameters, but functions are not the only ones in JavaScript that can help us create a meaningful program. In a real life scenario, you need to provide several outcomes, several results, several outputs for a given number of inputs. So your programs must learn to react towards situations which are quite predictable, although you don't know what's gonna exactly happen when the user provides some sort of data to your program. These interactions can happen inside your program, or you can actually create a program, or you can actually include codes inside your program or inside your functions that can react at certain point of your program in a certain manner. So to specify things, we need to learn how to use the conditionals. So conditional statements uses conditional operators. So conditional statements helps us to make helps the program actually to make decision on certain given conditions. So what it does, suppose that you have a user form in your website. So your website has that user form, and it has the it has a field called age. Now suppose it's a website for young students, so you only want a specific age group to enter your website. You can only create a group, you can only create a condition that will only allow people within a specific group range. For example, like you want a group range of 21 to 25 or 21 to 23, suppose. So we can create 3 conditions on the basis of this. So how do we create it? So the pseudocode code, or the literal code that we can speak about, or not exactly the computer code that I'm talking about, is that first we create an example in a real life literal language. Suppose we want that, taking the example of the user form where you want your users to input age within 21 to 23. This is a superficial example, but you'll get the hold of it once you understand it, and you can use conditionals as long as it is required. So suppose the pseudocode is something like, I'm not writing actual code right now, so pseudocode is speaking in a human form, not exactly in programming form. So when we talk about pseudocode, let us say if the visitor, or in this case the visitor is actually trying to register inside your website, to register as a member inside your website, but you only allow, suppose, users who are in between the age group of 21 to 23. So when we write this program, first we need to decide on our pseudocode. That makes our program a lot easier when we write it in our real life. So if the visitor is let's say if he's 21 or if she is 21, then let him register. So this is the first pseudocode, very simple pseudocode that we are going to implement in our code. So when we talk about conditionals, we're actually telling the program, unless he is 21, if he is actually below 21, then he won't be able to register in our website as a member. So if he is 21, then he can register. Then again, we can also add inside our if conditional statements another conditional statements, like if the visitor is above 21, and this and will be converted into a programming, and it has special meaning when we write our conditional statements. So we'll be talking about that in a while. So if the visitor is above 21 and below 23, then let him register. And now let's provide a default conditional part that the program will execute if none of the conditions that we provide are met by the visitor. So if otherwise, the last thing that we'll be writing about in our pseudocode is that otherwise don't let him register. So in the pseudocode, I actually wanted to show you how we're going to transform this pseudocode into our actual programming language. So let us first keep this inside a comment so that it helps us creating the conditional a lot. It helps us to create the condition a lot easier. So first, before we create or implement this pseudocode into a programming language, into JavaScript, we are going to discuss a little bit about the comparison operators. So there are a few comparison operators that will help us to determine the track of our program. So we need to keep them in mind very carefully. These comparison operators are actually from its ancestors C programming. So most of the languages that we talk about, most of the programming languages perhaps that we talk about in today's life are actually child languages, as you may put it, from its mother language, which is C programming. So this comparison operators, these conditionals, the functions that we talk about are actually derived from the C programming, but but this JavaScript code has certain implementations that are different, and it helps us to create more interactive and dynamic websites, which C can't do for us. And besides, C is not even an object-oriented programming language, it's a procedural programming language. So that's a different discussion, and I'm not going to discuss all this about right now. So the thing that we were talking about was that we were going to learn about this comparison operators. So the first comparison operators that we'll be talking about is, so basically I'm actually starting a comment. If you look into this part, so this / and this asterisk is actually telling the compiler that we are going to start multi-line comment. So if you don't remember this, I'm actually reminding you. So this is the end of the multi-line comment. So multi-line comment is actually where we put our comments or pseudocodes, so that it helps us understanding the program far more. It makes the program easier to understand. So this double / actually tells the compiler that we are going to start a single line comment. So suppose we write this, and again after we press enter, the compiler returns to its normal state, and it assumes that we are going to provide JavaScript code. So you may notice that I have actually saved this file as conditionals.js, and I have also created a JavaScript file that's an HTML file perhaps, and I've included that conditional.js inside this HTML file. And because this .js or JavaScript file cannot be run by itself, so it needs an HTML page or a layout to run. I hope you remember that. So let's get back to our comparison operators. So we were first discussing about this equality operator. So this equality operator is actually saying that if the right or the left operand is equal to the right operand, then do something. So when we talk about this right and left operand, it's actually different. So when we talk about operands, it's something like, as I've shown you, that operands are used by operators to operate on. But this might be really confusing to you, so let's modify this code, pseudocode, a little bit. So suppose let's tell the program, let's write the pseudocode something like, let's modify this up a little bit. If visitor, if the visitor, we are not going to use this is right now, so we are going to use visitor equals to 21. Now if you notice carefully that in variable declaration we used something like this, so var visitor equals to 21. So in this scenario, when we compare both of this equality and the assignment operator, this is known as the assignment operator, we see that both uses the equal sign. So how do we differentiate in between those? In computing, any equality operator or any equality is actually determined by double equals to sign, and an assignment operator is determined by a single equals to sign. So this equality operator works in a similar fashion in the real life in arithmetic. So if the value, in this case, when we what we mean by this single equals to assignment operator, we actually mean we are storing this numerical value of 21 inside this variable that we named as a visitor. Now what happens inside an if conditional statement is that it checks the value stored inside this if variable with the value that we provided on the right. So both of these are actually operands. This is actually pseudocode, but I'll be showing you the actual programming code in a little while. But we must understand this equality operators. So this actually checks whether the value inside this visitor is equal or equivalent with the value on the right hand or with this right hand operator. So now if this actually matches, then the program will do something that we tell it to do. Now there is another operator that is known as the identity operator, which takes the form of 3 equals to sign. Now basically when we talked about equality operator, it actually checks whether both the values are same. Even if both the values don't have the same type, this equality operator in here is going to convert both of them into a similar type, and then it's going to check. Now it might be confusing at first, but let me show you an example. Let me cut all of these things. So I need space, and now let's actually create this let's actually convert this pseudocode into a real program, into a real conditional statement. So if, let's say, if visitor is 21, then we start the conditionals body or the block of code with the curly braces.